The cold was the first thing to register, a sharp, invasive presence that seeped through the fine wool of his jacket. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the kitchen he had just left. Leo Van stood on the perfectly manicured lawn of his own home, a ghost at his own feast. Through the sprawling, floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the party in full swing. Laughter, muted by the thick, triple-pane glass, bounced around the cavernous living room. Crystal glasses clinked, shadows danced and swayed to the rhythm of a soft jazz trio he hadn't even known was hired. His wife, Clara, was the radiant center of it all, her hand resting on the arm of a silver-haired developer, her head tilted back in a peal of theatrical laughter. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger, and she had just locked him out. He had spent the last 48 hours in a culinary trance, a whirlwind of searing, braising, chopping, and plating. 30 guests, 30 of her father's most important contacts, potential investors, and city officials. A last-minute power play orchestrated by her father, Richard, and executed by Clara with the casual tyranny she had perfected over their 8 years of marriage. "Leo, darling," she had announced 2 days prior, breezing into his home office where he was hunched over blueprints. "Dad's having some people over on Saturday, 30 or so. I told them you'd handle the food. Something spectacular." It wasn't a request, it was a decree. His own deadline for the Ethelgard Tower preliminary submission, the culmination of 6 months of sleepless nights and painstaking work, was dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Oh, that can wait. This is important." Important for her father, for the glittering facade of their lives. He'd agreed, of course. He always did. His calm acquiescence had long been misinterpreted as weakness, his quiet nature as a lack of ambition. They saw him as Leo, the moderately successful architect who had married into a world far grander than his own. Leo, the quiet, accommodating husband of the brilliant Clara Sterling. Leo, the man who was good in the kitchen. They had no idea who he really was. They lived in his house, a masterpiece of glass and steel he had designed and built with the first significant earnings from his own quiet, unannounced success. They drove cars he paid the insurance on. Their family company, Sterling Construction, was teetering on the brink of insolvency, propped up by an anonymous investor who had bought up their debt through a labyrinth of shell corporations. That investor was him. They saw a dependent, a kept man. They had no idea they were the ones living on his charity. As he stood there in the encroaching chill of the evening, the humiliation was a physical thing, a cold knot in his stomach. But beneath it, a different feeling was stirring, a quiet, tectonic shift. The patience he had cultivated for years, the long-suffering dignity he had worn like a shield, was beginning to crack. And in its place, a calm, chilling clarity was rising. The party was for them, the food was from him. The house, however, was his, and they had just made a very, very big mistake. Have you ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own life, in your own home? It's a uniquely painful kind of isolation. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that way. What happened next wasn't just about getting back inside. It was about taking back everything they thought they owned, including his story. The story you're about to hear is about the moment the doormat decided he was done being stepped on. The kitchen, his sanctuary, had been a whirlwind of controlled chaos for 2 days. It was the one room in the house that felt truly his. Clara had wanted a sterile, all-white showpiece, something from a magazine. He'd insisted on a functional heart for the home. A 6-burner Wolf range, butcher block countertops worn smooth with use, and a rack of gleaming copper pots he'd seasoned himself. It was a space of creation and precision, a world away from the performative elegance of the rest of the house. As he worked, his hands moving with the practiced grace of an artist, his mind was a catalog of slights, a library of carefully filed humiliations. He remembered the first time he met Richard Sterling, a handshake like a dead fish, and an appraisal that lasted no more than 3 seconds, before Richard turned away, dismissing him completely. Over the years, the insults had become more direct, delivered with the casual cruelty of a man who believed his wealth made his opinions infallible. At a family dinner, Richard had picked up one of Leo's architectural sketches, a concept for a low-income housing project. "Still playing with your little drawings, Leo?" He'd boomed, to the sycophantic laughter of his sons. "When are you going to get a real job and help run a real business?" A real business, Leo thought as he expertly filleted a side of salmon, was currently leveraged to the hilt and 3 months behind on payments to its suppliers. Then there was Clara, his beautiful, ambitious Clara. He'd fallen in love with her fire, her drive, her seemingly unstoppable confidence. He hadn't realized that fire required constant fuel, and he was expected to be the kindling. The small dismissals had started early, forgetting to introduce him at parties, or introducing him only by his first name, severing his connection to her illustrious family name. When he won the prestigious Pritzker Fellowship, a quiet but monumental achievement in his field, she'd given him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately changing the subject to a gala she needed a new dress for. She framed his successes as quaint hobbies, his professional life a mere footnote to her grand narrative. And Marcus, her brother, the silent enabler. Marcus, who possessed all the arrogance of his father but none of the cunning. He lived in their guest wing, rent-free, for the past 6 months after his own startup, funded by Richard, of course, had spectacularly imploded. He treated Leo with a lazy contempt, borrowing his car without asking, leaving messes for him to clean up, and always, always siding with Clara and Richard during their casual verbal assaults. He was a moral vacuum, a testament to the corrosive nature of unearned privilege. Each chop of the knife on the board was a punctuation mark in this silent recitation. The shallots, diced with perfect uniformity, for the years of being made to feel small and insignificant. The rhythmic whisking of the vinaigrette for the constant, churning anxiety of keeping the peace. The searing of the scallops, a flash of intense heat, for the white-hot anger he'd so carefully suppressed. On a small, clean desk in the corner of the kitchen, away from the splatter of the stove, sat his worn leather portfolio. It was old, the corners softened with age, the leather bearing the faint scars of 100 journeys. To anyone else, it looked like a simple artist's case. To him, it was an arsenal. Inside, nestled in carefully organized folders, were the weapons of his liberation. The deed to this very house, registered to a private trust of which he was the sole beneficiary, certificates for a controlling interest in the debt of Sterling Construction, and the final, beautiful, devastating piece, the complete architectural plans and ownership documents for Ethelgard Holdings, the mysterious development company behind the city's most coveted new project, the Ethelgard Tower. The very project Richard was boasting he was about to land. The very project Leo himself had designed and funded. He glanced at the portfolio, a quiet promise to himself. Soon, the time for patience was almost over. The guests began to arrive just as he was putting the final touches on the canapes. A river of expensive perfume, tailored suits, and glittering jewelry flowed into the grand foyer. From the kitchen, Leo could hear the familiar sounds of the Sterling family in their element. Richard's booming laugh, a tool he used to dominate any room. Marcus's braying echo of that laugh. And Clara's voice, a silver thread weaving through the noise, charming, cajoling, captivating. He began to ferry out the trays of food, his creations. Miniature tartlets of wild mushroom and truffle, delicate towers of seared tuna on crisp wontons, skewers of saffron-marinated chicken. He moved through the crowd like a phantom, a silent functionary. A few people nodded at him, murmuring their compliments. "This is delicious," a woman in a diamond necklace said, not quite making eye contact. Clara spotted him and glided over, a proprietary hand on his arm. She turned to the developer she was speaking with. "This is Leo," she said, her voice bright and loud. "He's an absolute god in the kitchen. I don't know what I'd do without him." The developer smiled politely at Leo, a brief, dismissive glance before turning his full attention back to Clara. "An absolute god in the kitchen. Not my husband, the award-winning architect. Not my partner, the man who designed this very house. Just Leo, the cook." He felt the familiar sting, but it was distant now, like a memory of pain rather than the real thing. He simply nodded, offered the man a tartlet, and retreated to the kitchen. Later, as he was plating the main course, a complex, slow-braised beef rib that had taken the better part of 2 days to prepare, he overheard a conversation drifting from the dining room. It was Richard, holding court. "The Ethelgard Tower is all but ours," Richard declared, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. "The board loves our proposal. We have the inside track. It's the kind of legacy project that will secure the sterling name for another generation." Leo paused, the ladle hovering over a plate. He knew, from his own inside sources, that Sterling Construction's bid was mediocre at best, and their financials were a disaster. They were pinning their entire future on a fantasy. He caught the eye of a young woman standing nervously near the doorway, holding a clipboard. He recognized her as Sophia, a junior assistant from Richard's office, likely there to take notes and cater to the guests. She looked overwhelmed. She also looked like she knew something. He saw her glance nervously at Richard, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was all the confirmation he needed. They weren't just confident, they were desperate. Their arrogance was a mask for sheer terror. That knowledge settled in him, cool and hard as stone. It was one thing to be insulted. It was another to be the unknowing life raft for the people trying to drown you. The main course was a resounding success. A hush fell over the dining room, punctuated only by murmurs of appreciation. Leo, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, watched as Richard Sterling, a man who had never once acknowledged his worth, savored the dish Leo had poured his soul into. The irony was so thick he could taste it. Clara caught his eye and beckoned him over. The guests were applauding. For a fleeting moment, he thought she might actually give him credit. "Everyone," she announced, her voice ringing with false modesty, "I'm so glad you're enjoying the meal. It was an old family recipe." She smiled at Leo, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Leo was such a help in getting it all ready. A help, as if he were the hired hand. That was the moment, the final, imperceptible snap of a cord that had been fraying for years. Then came the final, calculated cruelty. As he was clearing the plates, Clara pulled him aside. "Darling," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "We're almost out of the Chateau Margaux, the 95. Could you be a dear and run down to the vintner's cellar and pick up a few more bottles? Mr. Abernathy is simply raving about it." The vintner's cellar was a boutique wine shop halfway across town. It closed at 8 p.m. It was now 9:30. She knew that. It was a snipe hunt, a way to get him out of the house so she could hold court, unburdened by his quiet, judgmental presence. It was a power move designed to remind him of his place. "Of course," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. He took off his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. He didn't look at her. He walked to the foyer, retrieved his jacket, and stepped out into the night, the sound of the heavy front door clicking shut behind him. He didn't drive to the wine shop. He drove around the block, parked where he could see the front of the house, and waited. 15 minutes later, he walked up the stone pathway. He reached for the handle. It wouldn't turn. He was locked out. He looked through the window next to the door. He could see Clara standing with her father, laughing about something. Her eyes met his. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, and then something harder, a smirk. She deliberately turned her back on him, dismissing him as completely as if he were a piece of litter on her perfect lawn. The quiet descended. It was a profound, ringing silence in his ears, a stark contrast to the muffled party music. He stood there, not on the doorstep, but a few feet back on the grass, a silent observer of the life he had built and been exiled from. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation. It was a state of being. He didn't bang on the door. He didn't shout her name. He didn't even feel the hot surge of rage he might have expected. Instead, he felt a strange, liberating peace. The performance was over. The need to pretend, to accommodate, to absorb had vanished. He was no longer a participant in their drama. He was the audience, and he was about to change the show. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen cast a cool blue light on his face. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a name he hadn't called in months. He pressed the screen. The time for patience was over. The time for consequences had begun. "Isabel," he said, his voice steady and clear when the call connected. "It's time. Please proceed." He listened for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Yes, all of it. And have the security team meet me at the property in 10 minutes. I'm on site." He hung up without saying goodbye. His second call was shorter, more direct. It was to the central monitoring station of the home's bespoke security system, a system he had designed and installed himself, with backdoors and override codes known only to him. "This is Vance, owner of 12 Elm Ridge. Authorization code 99 Alpha Tango. Initiate Protocol 0, effective immediately." The man on the other end, trained for this exact unlikely contingency, simply said, "Protocol 0 confirmed, Mr. Vance. Godspeed." Inside the house, Richard was delivering what he imagined was a masterstroke of a toast. He held his glass high, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. And so, with the Ethelgard Tower contract, Sterling Construction will not only reach new heights, but will define the very skyline of this great city. It is, I can now confidently say, a done deal. A smattering of polite applause followed. Clara beamed at him, her heart swelling with pride. This was her world. This was where she belonged. This was everything. It was in that precise moment of peak arrogance that the world ended. First, the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a blown fuse, but an abrupt, total plunge into darkness, silencing the jazz trio mid-note. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by nervous laughter. "Power outage?" someone asked. Then the sound began. Not a typical fire alarm, but a piercing, disorienting siren that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was accompanied by a series of heavy, echoing thuds as electromagnetic locks engaged on every window and door. The room was plunged into a state of primal fear. And then, the voice. It was calm, automated, and utterly chilling. It spoke from hidden speakers in every room, a disembodied, omniscient presence. "Perimeter breach detected. This property is now under the exclusive control of the registered owner. All unauthorized persons must vacate the premises immediately. This is not a drill. All unauthorized persons must vacate the premises immediately." Panic ignited. People scrambled for their phones, but there was no signal. The system included a cellular jammer. They were trapped. "Clara, what in God's name is going on?" Richard bellowed, his voice losing its authoritative edge, replaced by a tremor of fear. "Call the police! Someone! Do something!" But before anyone could react, the blaring siren stopped. The emergency lights, a stark, cold blue, flickered on, and the heavy front door, which had been sealed shut, unlatched with a loud, definitive click. Into the stunned silence and blue-tinged chaos, Leo walked. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by two broad-shouldered men in the crisp, dark uniforms of a private security firm. And just behind him, exuding an aura of unimpeachable authority, was Isabel Reed, his lawyer, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her sharp eyes taking in the entire scene with cold amusement. She held a familiar, worn leather portfolio in one hand. Leo's face was a mask of calm. He had shed the skin of the accommodating husband, the quiet background figure. In his own home, under his own control, he looked, for the very first time, like who he truly was, the man in charge. The sight of him, so composed and authoritative, was a profound shock to Clara's system. It was like seeing a piece of furniture stand up and start conducting an orchestra. "Leo!" she shrieked, a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this? Turn this off right now. You're scaring our guests." Richard pushed his way forward, his face a mottled red mask of rage. "You, what have you done? I'll have you arrested for this. You'll be ruined." Leo didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on Clara. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Isabel stepped forward, her heels clicking decisively on the marble floor. She opened the leather portfolio. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the lingering panic like a shard of ice, "I would advise you to remain silent. As for you, Mrs. Vance, or perhaps I should say Miss Sterling, my client is doing nothing more than securing his own property." She pulled out a thick document with a flourish. "This is the deed to 12 Elmridge Lane. It is held by a private trust, the North Star Group, established 8 years ago. The sole trustee and beneficiary of that trust is my client, Mr. Leo Vance." She let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow to the foundation of their world. "Your presence here, along with that of your family and your guests, is no longer authorized. You are, in legal terms, trespassing." The remaining guests, who had been frozen in a state of shocked curiosity, began to melt away, grabbing their coats and muttering apologies as they scurried out the open door into the night, desperate to escape the spectacular implosion of the Sterling family. Then came the quiet bomb, the one Leo delivered himself. He finally looked at Richard, his gaze level and devoid of any emotion. "You were so confident about the Ethelgard Tower, Richard," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You told your friends it was a done deal, a legacy project." He gestured to Isabel, who produced another set of documents from the portfolio. It was a letterhead, simple, elegant, with a stylized compass rose as its logo. The name on the top read, Ethelgard Holdings. "You see," Leo continued, his voice as soft as falling snow, "I've always believed in diversifying my investments. Architecture is my passion, but one needs a real business, as you've so often reminded me." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Ethelgard Holdings is my company. I am the client you have been so desperately trying to impress. And Richard, your firm's bid was unprofessional. Your financials are a shambles. And as of an hour ago, your proposal was officially and permanently rejected." The aftermath was not an explosion, but an implosion. Richard Sterling, the titan, the patriarch, the man who had built an empire on bluster and intimidation, seemed to shrink before their eyes. The ruddy color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He staggered back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond financial ruin. It was the terror of a man who has just discovered that the entire world as he knew it was a lie, a stage built for him by the very person he despised most. Clara's reaction was a rapid, horrifying metamorphosis. Her initial rage curdled into a desperate, pleading confusion. "Leo? A joke? This is a joke, right?" She took a step towards him, her hands outstretched, her face contorting into a mask of frantic appeal. "Darling, this is a terrible, terrible joke. We can talk about this. Whatever I did, whatever you think I did, I'm sorry. We can fix it." Her voice was a high, strained thing. The carefully constructed melody of her social grace shattered into discordant notes. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman he had loved, but a terrified actress whose stage had just been dismantled around her. "There's nothing to talk about, Clara," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You made your position perfectly clear tonight." This was the moment for the moral mirror. He held it up to her and to her father, reflecting their own behavior back at them with devastating clarity. "You called my life's work little drawings, Richard. In my own home, in front of your friends, you dismissed the very thing that paid for the wine in your glass. You treated me not as a son-in-law, but as an inconvenience." He then turned his full attention to Clara. "You introduced me as the cook. You took credit for my work. And then you sent me on a fool's errand so you wouldn't have to be bothered with my presence. You locked me out of my house, Clara, in the cold. You looked right at me and you turned away. Was that a joke?" Each statement was delivered without malice, a simple, factual recitation of the evening's events. It was this lack of anger that made it so much more powerful. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't seeking revenge in a fit of passion. He was a force of nature, a quiet, methodical reckoning that had been building for years. Marcus, who had been hiding behind a large, potted fern, finally stumbled forward. "Leo, man, we," he stammered, unable to form a coherent thought. Leo barely glanced at him. "And you," he said, his voice flat, "you have lived in my house for 6 months, contributing nothing, taking everything for granted. The sterling arrogance without the sterling bank account." He looked at the three of them, a tableau of shattered pride. "Isabel has the paperwork. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings. All of you. A truck will be here tomorrow morning at 9. My staff will supervise. Anything left behind will be disposed of." He turned to one of the security guards. "Please escort Ms. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, and Mr. Marcus Sterling from the property." The guard stepped forward. Reality finally crashed down upon Clara. "No!" she screamed, lunging for Leo. "You can't do this. This is my home. Leo, I'm your wife." The other guard intercepted her gently but firmly. Leo looked at her one last time. "A wife wouldn't lock her husband out, Clara," he said. And with that, he turned and walked toward his office, the sound of her frantic, desperate sobs echoing behind him in the vast, empty space of the house that was finally and completely his. The following morning arrived with a cool, gray dawn that seemed to suit the somber task at hand. At precisely 9 a.m., a large moving truck rumbled up the long, curved driveway. Leo watched from his office window, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. He had not slept. Instead, he had walked through the silent rooms of his house, reclaiming them. He ran his hand along the smooth, cool concrete of the fireplace he had designed, looked out the vast windows that framed the sunrise he had so carefully oriented the house to capture. It was a process not of celebration, but of purification. Clara, Richard, and Marcus were already there, standing on the lawn like shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. They looked haggard, their expensive party clothes wrinkled and stained, their faces pale and drawn. The arrogance of the previous night had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, pathetic vulnerability. Leo's assistant, a quietly efficient woman named Anya, met the movers and began to supervise, working from a list Leo had prepared. Only items belonging to the Sterlings were to be packed. Anything purchased by Leo, which was, he knew, nearly everything of value in the house, was to remain. Richard, surprisingly, was the first to break. He approached the house, not with bluster, but with the shuffling, hesitant gait of an old man. Anya intercepted him at the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but only the moving crew is permitted inside." Richard's face, once a fortress of self-assurance, crumpled. I need to get my files. My company," his voice trailed off. "All business-related materials from the guest wing office have been boxed and are on the truck," Anya said, her voice polite but firm. The finality of it seemed to break him. He turned away, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat, and retreated to his car, where he sat, staring blankly at the house that represented the pinnacle of his perceived success. Clara chose a different strategy. She waited until the movers were occupied with a large armoire, then approached Leo, who had come out onto the porch. She had changed her clothes and put on makeup, a desperate attempt to reconstruct her armor of poise and beauty. "Leo," she began, her voice low and intimate, a tone she hadn't used with him in years. "We need to talk. Last night, I wasn't myself. The stress, my father, you know how he is. He pressures me." She tried to take his hand, but he kept it firmly on his coffee mug. "I love you, Leo. You know I do. We've built a life together. You can't just throw it all away because of one stupid night, one silly mistake." He looked at her, at the practiced sincerity in her eyes, the tremble in her lips she could summon on command. He felt a pang of something, not love, but a deep, sorrowful pity for the person she had become, or perhaps always been. "One mistake, Clara?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Was it a mistake when you belittled my work in front of your friends for years? Was it a mistake when you forgot our anniversary because you were at a fundraiser for a museum you didn't care about? Was it a mistake every time you sided with your father when he called me worthless?" He took a sip of his coffee. "Love doesn't require an audience, Clara. It doesn't keep a running tally of who has more status. And it certainly doesn't lock the door on the person it claims to cherish." Her face hardened. The mask slipped. "So that's it? You're going to destroy my family, destroy me, over a little pride?" "No," he corrected her softly. "You destroyed your family with your pride. I am just holding up a mirror so you can see the damage." It was Marcus, the ghost at the feast, who surprised him. As the truck was being loaded with the last of his belongings, a pathetic collection of video game consoles and designer sneakers, he approached Leo, his eyes fixed on the ground. He stood there for a full minute in awkward silence before finally speaking. "Leo, he started, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. For everything." He looked up, and for the first time, Leo saw genuine shame in his eyes. "I was a coward. I always have been. They'd say things about you and I just laugh along, because it was easier, because I was scared of them too. What you did last night, it was terrifying. But you were right. We treated you like dirt. I'm sorry." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't a grand speech. But it was the first honest thing Leo had ever heard him say. It was a crack in the solid, unified wall of sterling arrogance. Leo considered him for a long moment. He saw the weakness there, but he also saw a flicker of something else, a potential for change born of total humiliation. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus," Leo said, his voice cool but not entirely dismissive. He made no promises, offered no absolution. He simply accepted the apology, a single, untainted brick he might use to build something new later. But for now, the demolition had to be completed. He watched as the moving truck pulled away, carrying the last vestiges of his old life with it, leaving him alone in the quiet, expansive silence of his new one. The weeks that followed were a study in deconstruction and reconstruction. Leo moved through his house with the deliberate precision of an architect redesigning a flawed structure. He had the opulent, uncomfortable furniture Clara had chosen removed, donating it all to a charity that supported women's shelters. He replaced it with pieces that spoke of comfort, clean lines, and quiet strength. Eames chairs, a solid oak table he built himself, shelves filled with books on philosophy and art, instead of glossy, unread coffee table books. The house began to breathe again. It began to feel like him. The tremors from his actions radiated outwards, shaking the foundations of the Sterling Empire. Without the Ethelgard Tower contract, Sterling construction collapsed with shocking speed. Investors, spooked by the public humiliation at the party and the sudden revelation of the company's true financial state, pulled out in a panic. Richard was forced into a deeply unceremonious retirement. The company he had inherited and run into the ground sold for parts to pay off its creditors. His legacy was not the skyline of the city, but a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Clara, stripped of her husband, her home, and her family's wealth, was adrift. She moved into a small, generic apartment complex in a part of town she used to mock. The friends who had flocked to her glamorous parties suddenly had no time for her calls. She was forced to get a job, a humbling position as an event coordinator for a mid-range hotel, a shadow of her former life as a society queen. Leo heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, that the reality of a life without a safety net was a brutal, relentless teacher. He felt no satisfaction in this, only a quiet, melancholic sense of inevitability. One afternoon, Marcus called him. He asked to meet. They sat at a small, unassuming cafe, a world away from the five-star restaurants the Sterlings had frequented. Marcus looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes were clearer. He explained that he had been working as a laborer for a small construction crew, the first real manual labor he had done in his life. He said the work was hard, but honest. "I needed to be humbled," he said, stirring his coffee. "I needed to learn what it felt like to earn something." He didn't ask for a handout. He didn't ask for a job. He simply wanted, it seemed, to show Leo that his apology had been more than just words. Leo had been observing him, quietly, for weeks. He had seen the change. He had seen the effort. He took a small, rolled-up blueprint from his jacket. "I'm starting a new project," Leo said. "A small one, a community arts center. The budget is tight, the work will be hard, and the pay will be minimal to start." He pushed the blueprint across the table. "I need an apprentice site manager, someone willing to start at the absolute bottom, learn every aspect of the build, and work harder than anyone else on the crew. It's not a gift, Marcus. It's a chance. A very difficult one." Marcus looked at the blueprint, then at Leo, his eyes welling with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more valuable, an opportunity for redemption, one that had to be earned, inch by painstaking inch. Leo paid for the coffee and left, feeling not like a victor, but like a man who had finally balanced a set of dangerously misaligned scales. His own life was also being rebuilt. He had awarded the Ethelgard Tower contract to a young, innovative firm of architects whose vision and integrity impressed him. He was acting as a consulting partner, mentoring them, guiding them. He found more joy in fostering their success than he ever would have in building it alone. He was free. Months later, Leo stood on the balcony of his house, looking out over the city as dusk settled, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The skeletal framework of the Ethelgard Tower was beginning to climb towards the clouds in the distance, a symbol not of power or legacy, but of a new beginning, built on a foundation of truth. He thought about the events that had led him to this moment of quiet solitude. He thought about revenge. The world celebrated grand, fiery acts of vengeance, of returning pain for pain. But that had never been his way. His revenge had not been in the destruction of the Sterlings, but in the simple, irrefutable revelation of who he was. He hadn't needed to become cruel or monstrous to defeat them. He had only needed to finally, fully, and unapologetically be himself. He had taken their power not by force, but by removing the props that held it up: his money, his home, his silence. Their empire, it turned out, was a house of cards, and he had simply stopped holding his breath. He felt a profound sense of peace, a satisfaction that ran deeper than any fleeting sense of victory. It was the quiet, solid satisfaction of a soul that has reclaimed its own narrative. He had learned that true worth is not measured by the applause of others or the glitter of wealth, but by the quiet integrity of one's own heart. Dignity is not something people can give you. It is something you must refuse to surrender. Patience, he now understood, was not weakness, but the strategic gathering of strength. And sometimes the most powerful act is not to fight, but to simply step aside and let the consequences of others' actions play out, like a perfectly executed law of physics. The world had a way of balancing itself if you just gave it time. They say that living well is the best revenge. And while there is truth in that, I believe that sometimes revealing the truth is what truly satisfies the soul. It's not about inflicting pain, but about ending a lie. It's about restoring balance to a world that has been tilted by arrogance and disrespect. What do you think? Was Leo's response justified, or did he go too far? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments down below. Every story has a lesson, and perhaps the lesson here is that the quietest person in the room is often the one with the most to say. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and deserved redemption. We'll see you in the next one.